It was a bright summer day in 2005. My parents and I had just moved from Europe to Peru, and for a while, everything was just great. But then, my new school year began. By the end of the first week of classes, I had somehow ended up in the principal's office. Before I even had a chance to learn my fellow classmates' names, I had already attacked one of them and kicked him in the shin. Now, before you start thinking I was some kind of pre-K bully, please let me explain my story, for it can teach all of us a thing or two about the way in which cultures interact. Everything began when I first walked into my new classroom. Before my eyes, I saw this crowd of loud, lively kids. They were dashing around, hugging one another after vacations. And what scared me was that they were talking amongst each other, not in English, but in Spanish. Since I didn't have the remotest clue of what they were saying, I began to fear their conversations. Could they be making fun of me? Were they plotting something against me? To make matters even worse, I got this unnerving impression that the kids kept getting closer and closer to me. And then one of the boys stepped out of the crowd and put his hand on my shoulder. At that point, my fear reached a breaking point. With my heart pounding, I did what seemed to be the only reasonable thing to do. I kicked the boy, shoved him aside, and ran away. Now, as you might be guessing, that did not work out well for me. And the kids probably thought that I was out of my mind. Of course, nothing was quite as it seemed to me back then. As it turns out, the kids had absolutely no ill intentions towards me. By putting their hand on my shoulder, they had simply tried to greet me in their home country. However, their physical closeness was something that I could simply not wrap my head around. Since I come from Poland, I was used to a relatively reserved culture, where any form of physical contact, which goes beyond the usual handshake, is exclusively reserved for family and very close friends. So when I saw these kids around me speaking in a foreign language and acting in a way which I could not decipher, my natural inclination was to assume a defensive stance. My brain turned the children's harmless acts into potential threats. To better understand this behavior, we need to look back in time, into our evolutionary past. According to psychology professor Steven Newberg, back when we were hunter-gatherers living in small tribes, anything that stepped beyond our social norms more often than not suggested danger. In order to build successful societies, every individual had to be fully invested in members of his or her group. Outsiders from other tribes never had the same built-up investment in us or our group. And so, they were more likely to pose a threat to us by stealing our resources, by cheating us, or by violating our norms and values. With time, we gradually developed an instinct to protect ourselves from these outsiders. This instinct automatically prompts us to push back against any behaviors which we are not used to. Although we developed as a society and now live in a more globalized planet than ever before, our tribal instincts are still alive. So we are still likely to distrust people and cultures which are different from our own. Of course, the sense of threat we feel is significantly greater when we are confronted with a larger number of people. That's why my fear of the other children was significantly greater than their fear of me. It is important that we remember, however, that when it's taken to the extreme, our fear of everything that's different can lead to xenophobia and racism and religious or political persecution. Now, going back to my story, my parents naturally got quite worried when they got that dreaded call from the principal's office. So in an effort to help me adapt to my new environment, they found a Spanish tutor for me. By learning their language, I began to understand the kids around me, as well as their behaviors. Although it initially scared me, I came to appreciate the openness and warmth with which Peruvians greet strangers. Unlike Polish culture, Peruvian customs encouraged me to express my emotions more freely and to interact with other people more genuinely. Funny enough, when I moved back to Poland in 2012, I felt like people rejected my new, more international personality. When I walked into an elevator and greeted people with a warm smile, people would just stare at me and nobody would answer back, because they simply weren't used to being greeted in such a warm and open manner. This made me realize that a Peruvian kid dropped in the middle of Polish society could feel just as excluded and rejected as I felt distressed and threatened when I first came to Peru. I came to believe that one of our main goals as 21st century citizens is to take control of our tribal brain. In other words, we have to make sure that we do not assume a hostile attitude towards people and cultures which are different from our own. This is by no means an easy task, but my experiences taught me that by being open-minded, we stand to gain much more than we stand to lose. By adopting positive traits from other cultures, we can enrich our personality. We can also foster a deeper sense of unity and cooperation in the world. In light of the various social, religious, and racial divides which are spreading across the United States and the world, I'd say that now the time has come. Now, more than ever, is the time for us to reconsider the attitudes we adopt towards those who don't necessarily look, think, or act like we do. Gracias. Merci. Dziękuję bardzo. And thank you very much.